Yana?
Yes, I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay. I'm James Walker. I'm a member of the Development Committee here at New Hope Baptist Church in Michigan City.
Okay, good, good, good. I'm glad that the church is represented. I was just telling Tina, I'm really happy that y'all are here. Hi. Um, I know, right? I wish I would have advertised it more. But do you know Fatima? Okay. It's a couple of people on Zoom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped in your Zoom.
And let me just uh, okay.
Hello, I am Clarence Halls. I'm the Director of Development for the City of Michigan City. So,
Okay. Good to have y'all here. Good to have y'all here. Okay, so I just put some questions in the chat, and those are pretty much the prompt that I wanted to discuss. Feel free. Um, and so the first one is how do development deals actually, how are they financed? And this conversation, I really wanted to talk about, everybody knows about tax incentives. And then there are some particular ones that people gravitate towards depending on what it is. So you have the low income tax credits, you have historic tax credits, you have some climate specific climate resiliency tax incentives, and then you have opportunity zones. You have all of these different areas where you can fill gaps in financing with tax credits. But there are also grants that exist. There are also philanthropies that can contribute to this. And so a lot of the work that I do at Mecca Development is figuring out what a good partnership needs to be to go into a development deal so that you can access all of those different types of funding. Because sometimes it depends on the type of entity you are. And so that's one of the conversations that we work a lot with folks on is how to actually partner with the right people. And so looking at developers, nonprofit organizations, community stakeholders and associations, and then making sure that when you do start to develop, you have the programs allocated so that you can maximize that funding source or that revenue source. And so let me see, I do have like a little table that I wanted to share. This happened in uh, Brooklyn and a part of Brooklyn that had been vacant for about 22 years. And the previous owners of this particular site had a brewery. So it was a lot of contamination underground because there was a lot of my brother is here. There were a lot of spills and just as you can imagine with beer, making of beer. And so if you know about mediation can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're not careful. And this was a pretty large site. So in a nutshell, the nonprofit developers were able to partner with a bunch of people locally. And also they had politicians on their team. They had private developers, architects, pretty much a really robust team. And they were able to do 500 affordable units. And they raised over $22 million for this particular project. And so what tools can be used across disciplines to make that process a little bit shorter because it did take a couple of years to get this off it. And then I'll show you the results of this project. It did eventually gentrify the neighborhood. And so my question was, what safeguards are necessary at the beginning of projects to avoid neighborhood exploitation? And then can these things be maintained over time, depending, or does it have to stay with whoever, conceptualized the projects and executed it? Can we figure out how to sustain this by just creating some type of like deed, I don't want to say covenants, but something similar to that where you understand how to maintain the structure and the property and the site after the original folks have left, whether they sold or whether they just moved. And then for this particular project, because so much information came in from different agencies and people, a lot of times there was projects being stalled because of the lack of communication. So how can we mend those gaps and create some type of streamlined method of communication for development projects so that everybody understands where the project is and what they need to be contributing to each phase. All right. So the way that this research was conducted was a series of interviews was done between residents in the property, some of the people who were originally involved in the conceptualization, and then a lot of just whatever publications existed. And then data. So I used a lot of GIS, which I'll go through in a little bit, and use some data to do scenario planning. So I tested out if they were to do this a different way, what would the potential outcomes be? And so this particular case focused on development guidelines, understanding zoning, understanding land use, and understanding how to leverage those things to access different incentives, thinking about economic trends, understanding models. So we know that if you live in a particular site and you start to invest in it, typically you're going to either attract businesses or people are going to come because of the nature or the vibe of the space. So when that happens, you see like these trends, and you need to understand what you're contributing to that trend. And because if you understand that and you understand how economics work, you can figure out, in 20 years, this is what's going to happen if we do this move today. And in health equity, a lot of our neighborhoods are contaminated or are not remediated properly. So because of that, there is a lot of illnesses in a lot of these neighborhoods, particularly ones that have been redlined in the past, because that lack of investment, but then also the influx of industries that are not safe, like pollutions from trash, or just a lot of the zoning allows for unsafe, hazardous types of buildings to be in our residential neighborhoods. So thinking about that as well. And then tool development, how can we create this method once and then figure out how to make it flexible enough to expand for different sites. And so for this, a lot of things went into place to make sure that this case study was robust. So working with the original Riseboro was the organization who actually built this development. So working with them, understanding their strategic plans, understanding their annual reports, what their goals were. Reggie, can you get my charger out my book bag? It's in a big pocket. And then ethnographic analysis, like I said, we did interview quite a few folks with GIS. And then we basically set up a bunch of metrics. She's getting an extension cord. So we wanted to understand what Riseboro cared about the most. So we just narrowed it down. Let's focus on housing, senior centers, and then education and youth services. So if we just focus on those particular initiatives, we can start to plan our scenarios out a little bit differently. So these are the particular stakeholders, and this is going to be important when we really get into the conversation, because knowing the stakeholders allows us to figure out what funding we can access. So you see here the different colors represent different ways that different basically types of money. And so you have the residents who are a stakeholder in terms of they are living here. They're the people that are paying rent or mortgages, paying property taxes, going into the businesses and supporting those people. You have the private developers who are accessing these tax incentives and applying for a lot of things, basically assembling the team. You have NYPD and all of these other important stakeholders that are basically maintaining the community. And then in the mix of all of that, you have the churches, the businesses, coalitions, the health centers, the community development corporations. And so with that, start to map out, okay, if you have this list of stakeholders, this is what they do. So these are the different ways that they can work together. These are different organizations and how they collaborate together. And then this is what they execute together. So for instance, New York Restoration Project, they collaborated with EcoStation, which is transportation, and they collaborated with Riseboro, who does the nonprofit servicing. And so they designed and implemented green infrastructure projects that automatically gave them additional access funds. They advocated for funding and policy support. So again, the politicians were important in this because they had to understand who is in office and for how long, so they can know how much time they had to get their proposals in. And then they integrated these green spaces into the existing fabric. So the city already has to pay for infrastructure in certain areas. So understanding what that infrastructure is, if you tie your project to it, that automatically equips you to that financing. So working with the eco transportation hub allowed them to say, well, there's a train station 5 blocks away from this. We want another stop here. We want you to pay for this because that's what you do. That's your department. And we're going to, in turn, create this hub for people to communicate and kind of coexist together. So they were creating parks. People are going to go to the park, they need to get to the park. So that's the way you bring stakeholders in and then hold them accountable for basically making sure that their department is doing what they need to do. So once they understood what challenges they each had, they can figure out who is in a better position to navigate those challenges. So if a resident is having trouble navigating these town halls and actually getting something done, but they partner with 10 community development corporations in the area who all are advocating for the same thing and have a little bit more leverage because they have, they're supplying jobs to folks, then you get the job done a little bit faster. And so just to show a little bit of the credibility side of the research, I need some water. Can you go in my car and get some? So Michael Bell is this professor in housing, and he has quite a few books. He really looks at housing disruptions. So a lot of the trends that you see, like even something that he was privy to was the types of lighting that restaurants have. After a certain time, it allowed them to spend their hours. He really focuses on what's going to disrupt the market and create a different trajectory. Richard Brown is a director of finance at Impact Brooklyn, who is another community development corporation, and he focused specifically on affordable housing developments. Batu Deity is a renowned stakeholder engagement person. She really focuses on the value chain, which is what we talk about when you understand the phases of development and understanding how to maximize financing and funding in each of those phases. And then Adam Freed works at Bloomberg Associates. He was really big on climate adaptation and figuring out how you can program your site to access a lot of different climate incentives to get funding for that. And then I'll go through these really quickly. Milo is now the dean at UVA, but he was really big on health equity, looking at what happens to our neighborhoods that have been gentrified, what happened before they get gentrified, what happens to our health and our ability to maintain our mental and social and emotional well-being in these neighborhoods when we live in toxic environments. And then Pavel was my advisor. He was at Riceboro. James is big on tool development. He worked at Google. Arijit Sen is based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, also teaches at UWM and has a field school that does ethnographic research. And then David Ying was a tenant who lived in the luxury apartments and gave his insight on what it was like when they did the difference between the affordable units and then the luxury units right next to them and how they basically did a very hard split. So it was very easy to tell the difference and how awkward that was for community cohesion. So this is, one second, I'm thirsty. So this is my site analysis using geographic information systems, looking at 10-year increments. I really wanted to just understand trends in the neighborhood if anything was popping out. And so as you'll see, this is a parametric version of that, which shows, dang, y'all can't see nothing. That shows basically the blue is when they first started to develop. And as you can see, once they did that remediation, development kind of spurred in that area. So what I was really interested in was how those things correlated, because the land originally, when they got to it, was really cheap because it had all of this contamination on it. And so this is this period here. And so this is when they were starting to make the plans and starting to develop. And then once they started to put some more buildings here, you could see that the land prices just skyrocketed and it just stayed consistent in that way. But it was a big boom 10 years after they did the remediation. and then it kind of stabilized. So what this is telling us is the correlation between the cost of buildings on land and then also the actual cost of land had a correlation where, like, if in 2000 I built 20 buildings, I'm not going to see that price increase until 2020 when I do this analysis again, and then it'll stabilize again in 2030. But that stabilization is now you're at a higher bracket. So if you were able to afford something in 2020, you may not be able to afford it in 2030, if that makes sense. And so understanding that allows us to do some long-term planning. This project was successful in a sense that they did a lot of different typologies. So they had townhomes, they had condos, they had single family, they had apartments. So you had a variety of types of buildings that people can access, and that allowed for some people to actually become owners of that space. The problem is that the people who are renting did not get any equity. So the people who were actually buying things 20 years down the line, they're pretty nice. But the other people probably had to leave as the neighborhoods kept increasing, because one thing that happened is after they built the 500 affordable units, a lot of private developers came in and bought up a lot of parcels and started to do market rate buildings all around it. So that's a whole nother conversation, but I really wanted to just get to this page, which shows you the funding source, what the funding can be used for, zoning and tax incentives, and then the entity types that can be leveraged with that funding. That's essentially what this conversation is today, because knowing what the stakeholders contributed to the project, knowing what the outcomes were, allowed us to then go back in hindsight and say, they leveraged these different types of funding sources to raise $22 million. And this is what all of those funding sources can be used for. If we wanted to do another project like that, we should be tracking these things. And then these are the particular types of zones that you have to look out for or be privy to. And then these are the types of entities that can access that. So like I said in the beginning, if you know who you what you want to do and you build the right team, you can figure out who has the right entity type to access these different funding sources. So I do want to open it up because I didn't want this to be a lecture. But I do want to hear your thoughts, and maybe we can just start from there. And I can, if I need to show you some more stuff, I got stuff for days. So. Y'all don't have no thoughts?
Are there strategies that help mitigate or reduce the risk or exposure to the escalation of prices? How you talking about
Yeah,
purchase early
yeah,
and now just everything is expensive,
yeah.
even just to replace the same thing? Are there any strategies that people have started to request to be implemented to help the original owners keep what they have used before? Initial strategy is to like buy it and sell it.
Right.
Stay, but then they're probably dropping her say they can afford to stay.
Yeah. So there are a few strategies. I'll just pull some from Milwaukee that I've been privy to because I've been just reading up a bunch of stuff. So oh, did you guys hear the question? Is anybody on here?
No, we did not. We couldn't hear her.
Okay, so I'll repeat it in a nutshell. She asked, are there any strategies to mitigate the rising cost of just maintaining something, especially for people who are property owners, who after a while, they might not be able to afford. Like in the research that I just showed, after that development spur happened, a lot of the original folks no longer could afford to live there, even though it was the same house. Right? Did I get that? The gist? But so I was saying that I'll pull some examples from Milwaukee and what they've started to implement, and I'll talk about some other strategies that I've seen. So in Milwaukee, there is an acquisition fund. So a lot of times when you're going into a development project, you look at the entire cost based on, hard cost, soft cost, and what you estimate that will be. If you have a general contractor, you can better understand basically how much it's going to cost to build things out. And then you put some type of estimate together and start to go after some funds. But a lot of times, once you start developing, if timelines are delayed or if anything happens, cost of material goes up, tariffs, you can't get stuff shipped to you, then that all costs extra money. So you usually have some contingency funds. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because whatever I don't put in the budget is going to have to come out the other end. So a lot of times these budgets are already made at looking at a particular income bracket to get access to. So if you're developing something that 50% of the residents in a particular area can't afford, and then you have to make up costs that you lost throughout the build of the project, then that price is going to increase even more. So what people have started to do is take away some of the hardest parts to start a project, which is like the pre-development costs that can be a little tricky because it can be a little bit more difficult to estimate. But if you have funds that exist where you can pull money from and then put money into it, then that alleviates that issue for taking out expensive loans or whatever it is that you have to do. So that's one thing that I've seen that I'm really excited about what that trajectory is going to look like, because it's first of all going to help a lot of developers who don't have a lot of access to capital get some and maybe develop a little bit smarter. But on the other end of that, I think for me, it's always about, are we thinking about equity at the beginning of the project? So like I mentioned before, I liked the Riseboro project because they had a variety of typologies. People could buy or whatever, but there is a need for us to expand our equity models. So we have, if you're an owner, you get mortgage, you could take equity out. If you work in a particular job, you can get the 401ks. Maybe they don't do that as much anymore, but there are ways that people can build equity over time just because that's how the system is set up. There are not enough financial products that allow for people who don't own something to have equity in it. And I think that because you're seeing a lot of corporations buy out this massive pieces of land and then everybody now has to rent, you have to figure out some type of financial product that allows renters to have equity in their project. Because if 20 years down the line you've been a long-term renter and now something happens, you shouldn't have to leave without any equity. So I think that there are some I haven't seen it as much here. Maybe in New York they're doing a couple of things like that, but in Rwanda is where that conversation really started to take off, because a lot of people own land and didn't have capital to build. So they would get investors come in, and that's how they have a lot of informal settlements. But they were talking to me about, can we take our money offline essentially and create a new currency in tokenization and basically leave capitalism behind and create another type of leverage. So that's a whole nother conversation. But the idea behind it is, what else can be used as collateral that is not typically used? Because we need to start thinking a little bit differently about what assets people have, and how that can be used to grant them some type of relief if they need it. Is that? It is similar to a co-op. Co-ops are a little bit difficult though, because you have those fees and it can be difficult to maintain if there isn't cohesion. That was another, yeah, like maintenance and stuff like that. So like it was a co-op, a really big one that was in New York that I was like going to a lot of their meetings. And it was difficult because they got awarded this co-op because they had this really nice, and I might get the facts wrong, but I think it was a nitrogen building on the water. And when they started to develop that area, it phased out of that period of like subsidy. And so they sold it to a private developer in a way to mitigate the basically uproar, people, like all of those people losing their access to homes, is they created a co-op. So if you were there, you got access to that type of ownership. But decades down the line, they're having these meetings about how it's different ones for the different buildings, but they have to like work together to get what they need. And it's a little bit difficult because if people don't value the same things, and it's just those type of issues. So it's kind of like that is a good model, but I would like to see another model that isn't so dependent on like, especially if it's a very big, building with thousands of people, we might not all think the same. So can it be more of an individualized approach? And, so that's what I'm really interested in. So the CDFIs are more able to make those more flexible financial products and work with the developers and the city agencies, but I'm not really sure what that collateral is going to look like on the other end of that. Yeah. Anything like I'm curious to know, it's such a small group, so I would like to know if there's anything in particular that you all are interested in talking about or hearing about. So quiet.
Does it require often development for gardens, but it can be at expense of things, you know, holding out until they came, and it's never, not even taken for them to just the shift for money.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I said, I care what my neighbor does. If it didn't impact me, like you can build a Taj Mahal, you can, but that's not how to treat it.
Mhm.
And then equity and value are determined based on race and what have you. For the same building, so that nothing changed and a different person came all of a sudden, like there's value. So what is
Right.
it? What are, again, I guess, mitigants of what reform is being pushed so that development or revitalization occurs,
Mhm.
but not at the expense of humanity.
Mhm.
Just start
Yeah.
human needs, so not at the expense of sacrificing the population to bring new and vacant, don't hold it in vacant.
Mhm.
Houses, plants, and all these other things that are inclusive just to hold it out for whoever the previous time. So is there like policy could being pushed, or like that's not really the concern, I'm just using, oh, we need to build, you know, X amount of houses anyway, and they're using like blanket, you know, language to talk about housing, but it's a controlled situation.
Yeah. So you just said a whole bunch. I'm gonna try to reiterate as much as I can, but so basically the question was around gentrification and how it occurs in a sense that you have people who have been maintaining a community while it was not being invested in, and all of a sudden, now it's worth something. So, is there policy essentially that can stop gentrification from happening, if the interest of the development that is happening is not beneficial or even aligned with the existing community? Is that essentially? Okay. So I would say yes, everything is really like the policy is the permissions, right? And you can leverage it if you know how it works. And that's why people are able to do so many things because there are a lot of loopholes in policy. But I would say that, okay, so remember when I mentioned the economic models, the modeling that was part of the case study. That part was really important because it'll say, okay, so the policy part would be like the land use. This particular building can be used for a gallery, but it cannot be used as a grocery store, right? So you have your restrictions and what you can and cannot do. And so if I understand how economics work, and I understand that this whole block is filled with galleries, and there are no grocery stores, if I create a grocery store, then my prices can be whatever I want them to be because there is now a need that only I can fill. So when you see like all of a sudden, interest in land values are going up, it's because that has not, it's the thing where I showed you it took 10 years to actually see the evidence of that gentrification that happened, because the prices were increasing so slowly, but all of a sudden. So now you have one thing that's, fake like these chairs are houses. Every one of these chairs are worth $1, but 10 years later, every one of these chairs are worth $20. So if you have a chair, you have $20 and you only invested $1, but there are people who were able to bring that $20 in, but the people here only had $1. So what you're saying is there a policy that can basically prevent the people from just basically buying up all of the shares, which is gonna continue to increase that price, and you're not basically able to mitigate or stop it. So the policies that you would put forth is like, so I want to say, and I want you to, because you're running for stuff, to add to this. So I'm thinking about basically the stipulations about community benefit agreements. And so now they had, when they were running through New York and making all these highways, and they made the policy for the Highway Act to put money behind that. There are things, people are bringing policy to the table and saying that this is how you're going to benefit from it. And the reason why they can say that is because they have leverage or because they have an understanding of what it's going to do on the flip side. So a lot of people can exploit particular time periods because of a need. So one thing that I was telling you about, Reggie, was the Trump, documentary where it basically showed how he got those billion-dollar tax write-offs, and then he just went bankrupt because he used it as a tool. But he leveraged the fact that New York was at a place where it was borrowing money from other places because the mayors were just reallocating money to things that were frivolous, and they were losing money. And so he said, if we do this big development, this is going to bring you back to the center of whatever, blah, blah, blah. He got people to, like, he understood what they wanted. And so he proposed something. They made a little tax loophole that he can leverage. And then he was able to get that done, and it did what it was supposed to do. So the real question is, what leverage does the community have that can be used to influence policy that has some enforcement behind it? Because a lot of times policy exists and there's nothing that's going to happen. And even if it does happen, it's not going to hurt enough to make a difference. And so that's what you really need to look out for, just first understanding what exists and what you can exploit, and then understanding how to increase your leverage. So if you know that, like you mentioned, the unhoused population is a big thing, but there's vacancies just sitting here. That's something that that got me into this. And so for me, when I talk to people in city government, I'm asking them, what do you think is urgent? Because right now you're sitting on millions of dollars of assets that are not bringing you any money, but actually, if you look at how much you're spending on maintaining this, because you have to a certain degree, then you're actually, so if you play the game, you either have leverage to say, I can add this, or you can say, look how much you're losing. And with media, I think that's the biggest leverage you can have if you don't have financial leverage. Oh, hi, Sherry. Thanks for joining. Good to see your name.
Hey, hello.
Just-
So what is the biggest question? How do you leverage the money or the relationship?
I think which do you think is in this case? Giving you more benefit. The question is, it was a bunch of questions, but the one I want to answer is, if you're a community member, resident, owner, renter, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and you want something done, and not even that you want something done, you want to make sure that what's being done in your community isn't going to cause harm to you.
Yeah.
What would you do?
Because you leverage your local officials. Your alder person, if you go attend the committee meetings where they make it advocate for it for policy one.
Anything like that?
As a developer or as a
As a
community,
community person.
a team of who? Your team would be, your stakeholders would be your developer, your architects, your construction people, your whole team to put the project together, the projects.
What if they don't have a particular project, they just don't want?
That is the relationship that you go to those community meetings and you make it known, the more the better, but you have to be at those communities and talking to them when they come up.
Yeah.
we're making those decisions based on feedback and community.
Mhm.
So you gather a group of people and you show that those meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yeah.
Every week. They have it, and you tell them that what you want to help them with the community, then you gotta apply pressure for the local.
Okay.
Because to your point, if the community has outraged in the common council where the audit person goes back and still approve the bill, then that goes against what the community said it was.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. So for the people online, I'm not sure if you can hear the entire room correctly, but the question came up before, how, if you're a community resident or a community member and there's development coming into your area, how do you, like, is there a policy or some type of protection that you need to look for, or how do you stop that? And so Jordan, who is running for state assembly for District 12 right now, he said that you should be talking to your officials, your city officials, right? Elected officials, local officials, outer person, common. So those folks, to let them know your discontent and you need to be at the meetings with the development that's taking place. My follow-up question, and this is coming from the architecture side of my career, we know that a lot of times when we propose things, because we have a client, and this client could be the developer or the owner or whoever, we're going to design it and we're going to do the required community outreach and, charrettes or whatever it looks like. Usually in design, it's the charrette. But we've already, the budget is there, the construction documents are there. I know that, but I'm saying, and I think that I'm getting to the point where policy, I think, is shifting to give more leverage to community residents. But it comes up a lot, especially in architecture, when depending on whether they say something that's already in the plan, if they say something that's opposing that plan, it's not going to be incorporated, or you're just going to spin your wheels for years and years and years. And this happens a lot in New York, where development pretty much just runs over any and everything because there's money and leverage behind it. So I do want to just play devil's advocate. The follow-up question, the follow-up question is, what happens when you put together a plan for your community and then the developers coming in don't align with that plan and your plan isn't adopted, even though you did all of the steps required by that process that you just mentioned, where you're going to the meetings, you're doing all of this stuff, and it's still not being adopted, then what do you do?
If you got the community file, you got approval from the community and the common council for your audit person, there's a reason why I decision. That's part of the negotiation. And we point to that process. And negotiating what's going to be there, what's not going to be there, city, being what's been, zoning with like, all of these got to come together before it can finalize this. So in your case, you're saying the city doesn't know this because it's not a part of the long-term development plan. You have to negotiate that and either get it a part of the community plan or figure out a way that it could have a benefit for the community. Or you don't have that problem in this area. I know this area, I think the Lake she's right in the area, right? She's a fierce component of it. It doesn't benefit the community if it's not for the black people and our years back in the state. She's not going to prove it. She's not going to have a committee of the. So that's just the work that they have to do, which is the balance of the fine line that has to be done. Otherwise, you have to look for a different space. Probably won't be in this district or that district.
Mm-hmm. And that has happened before too.
Yeah. Why would come in here, even if they have the money to come in here and want to build something that a community doesn't want, or it's a big housing project that's great or whatever, and it's not gonna benefit the people in this community. It's gonna gentrify the area. Like I know lately it's not gonna, but that some other but
yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of your market research that you have to do. Figure out if this structure or this project going to be something that really benefits the community and they want it also.
Yeah. I think that's a great question because I've seen both ends of that and I've seen what people have done to navigate that. And I think that like how I mentioned at the beginning, it's really easy to get information that is just data based. Like you go to CoStar, you go to MLS, you get these hotspots. So you know if you invest in this area right now that it's gonna make you some return, which is why people might be wanting to build that kind of stuff. But if you don't do the other part of that, which is what you just mentioned, market research and understand, who lives there and what they want, what they care about, then you might still get your project stopped, depending on how strong that advocacy is there. And that's why it's even more important for renters to have some type of equity because it's easy for a business owner or an owner to have a say in like, I don't want this because they're not just gonna pack up and move tomorrow. They have like stakes on the ground. But now that the US at least is becoming increasingly more renter owned of what occupied, right? I'm like, I don't even know what that extra word is. But yeah, renter occupied. Then what does that look like if you have communities that are more transient? That's just a question in my mind. I actually want Reggie to answer that question. Tell me what you think. What's the first thing tell me something. Okay, I mean, because I'm asking because you're the new youth, you know what I mean? Like your generation is coming up and has to deal with the fact that you can't just buy a house with whatever savings is what is that. So what are you going to do? Like what do you want to do? What have y'all been thinking about? Who? Renting? Right? That's crazy. And I was wondering if you were gonna say like the co-living situation. Like you were talking about just being, yeah, it's a lot of those models, especially in New York popping up where people have like a townhouse or something that has 5 rooms and each of those rooms are going for like $1,000.
That's. You know, how long you know the community wants is part of the reason. If you go in an area where you have 90% residents in there, young, between 8 to 24, and then you have to go inside labor markets, employment rate is 4.5, 5, right? So there's no real job there, looking for something like that.
Hmm.
That's all part of the development process before you can get shovels in the ground, kind of figure out that before you even take it to the common council.
Right.
Question. And then they're gonna say, that's not what we want, that's not what we need also. Even if the community wants it, if they can't afford it, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
But the townhouse is not the cultural desire.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, but
It's the result of the action that comes from this is what we're,
normalizing.
yeah. This is why we're problem solving ourselves because we are doing all advocacy and still not doing anything.
But if the community says, you say they don't.
No, we said.
I'm saying that I've seen this happen.
Like this is
Yeah, yeah.
we're trying to make it all for all. Like our rent, in a lot of areas are exceeding the cost of owning, which makes 0 sense. And so, this is just the community providing, their own resolution. And then people who profit off of the displacement are now trying to push policy to prevent that too, or because that is not considered a cultural norm in housing for the US, then people see like this saturation in their neighborhood that was once maybe single family homes, and now we have all these tenants.
Yeah.
Renters.
Yeah.
And we don't like these extra people who manage up the makeup of our neighborhood or what we consider a tolerable, safe, or what have you neighborhood. So that's the issue.
So as a policy maker, What I would look at, if that's what the need is, and that's what the trend is, and that's what the affordability index is. And then looking at the research across the country, that is successful in New York, in Baltimore, the East Side, and they're doing different models. Why can't it be successful here, but have a similar makeup of the city? Culturally, it might be different, but now I'm looking at the policy here, what is the need? You're telling me that the community is taking it upon themselves to bring in more people to their homes because they need it. That means that we need to build more homes like that, if that's what the acceptable outcome is.
That's not true, that's not the resolution is. The need was based off this change in landscape from investors and
Mhm.
who are not meeting affordability needs. So like we have vacancies.
Yeah.
So there are places for people to go. New York might not be the best representation because they were all built oversaturated.
Yeah.
But across our country, Milwaukee had 5 vacancies. And I just told them and they're letting destroy and they'll hold it for the developer instead of putting it into a live family person pocket, like making it accessible. I think that's the easiest way to regenerate your own community and state and city. Because when people are in a comfortable home, they're gonna invest in it. They wanna make it as big as they want it, you know? So they'll invest in painting and beds and all this stuff, which is again, recycle money in their own community and neighborhood or wherever they're gonna get the stuff. But again, they're holding out for different monetary higher up needs that are making in natural housing situation, unnatural.
Yeah.
For our culture, other cultures like living in shared spaces where the grandmother, great grandmother, and
Mhm.
the adult children and their children, and they all live in there until I'm making afford to leave or until, whatever. That's not natural to the US. And so
It's not, so I would
it's
argue
not
that.
natural for the US. I mean, I'm talking about the great migration people were.
Well, from air migration, from good population, from Chinese and the Asian population, the Hispanic population. If you're talking culturally as a Black community, yes, you're absolutely right. But again, the models are similar across the board.
I mean, the Black people would be considered with other immigrant people. Like, they had to get in where they fit in as far as families too, but that is still not culturally US. It's like, this is how we solve our own problems when we were denied access. And this is how they're shifting housing trends. Oh, because we wanted to get over here, even if we have money, then you have the
Discrimination.
redlining and the stuff that's doing to syrup. And so it's not like, go advocate for yourself, because advocacy is always been,
So this again.
as a developer, project how you're gonna naturally force people so you can profit off of. That's not beneficial, because if people are like, I want this down home. Because too, some people are like our over capacity in their
Yeah.
space too, so you're just trying to
Yeah.
have a place to lay your head.
So I guess what I'm saying is, I mean, it's the same thing, and I agree with everything you said, but it's two different things. That first you mentioned the vacancies are up. So do you need vacancies in the home, individual, single family homes, or do you need vacancies in like all these buildings that put up with apartments there?
Both.
Both.
Right.
Because
So it's,
there are vacancies before these new developments.
Right.
And they're just like, no. And then they're gonna hold off until somebody can buy a house, because they're usually not community owned.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are unnecessary vacancies, and then that too is like, we're gonna make our own luxury area, and we're gonna make sure it stays luxury, so we're gonna
Yeah.
hold these vacancies until the right buyers come in.
It's okay.
So it's both.
So-
A majority, how.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is a higher level of prioritization, because the city's looking at it with a developer perspective. They're trying to create money. What we're saying from a community perspective is, you got all these vacant homes, and all these homes that can be remodeled and redone and constructed. The best thing in these market development should be investing in a single family homes that are vacant, and we bring those back.
I'm saying the people are capable, like, people act like developers bring in, is the only way to bring in
Right.
money, and
It's
that's
not.
it, it's not. It's the way that they exploit, extract, and then recycle it.
Yeah.
And so, if there was a true focus on bringing in money and sustainable money and growth, we would be putting
You could put it
people
back
in
on there.
place
So, homes that are on.
to stabilize and invest in what they have.
I got a question.
That.
So that's.
I do have a-
I would say the community needs to be taken to their level.
I have a question, and I don't know if people online can hear that there, but it's a, like, I don't know if the cyber thing is gonna be a thing.
I feel like turn my body.
Yeah, and then maybe I'll,
If you're in front of, they can hear you, but they can't.
I know, but I'm just like, y'all can have a conversation if they're not.
If I was on.
Yeah. But, what was I about to say? Did you know about the acquisition fund?
No.
That's what I'm saying, like, well, I didn't say anything yet, but what I am saying is that, one of the things that I wanted to mention, I have like a little diagram that it shows like at every phase of development, what can you do if you have, if you are developer or if you're resident or whatever.
That's me.
But.
Yeah, that's one.
Okay. So I was gonna ask if conversations with Milwaukee at least have had having around these funds, like creation of funds. Like there are some churches on the call who create funds. There are community development corporations that work with community CDFI to create funds. There are ways that you can put money aside and invest it and have an allocation of your tax dollars go into this fund. So you're already, the bid district dollars can go into this fund. This fund can be, created per district, per whatever it is, the way we set it up, probably per district. But they can be accessible to whoever has, written an agreement access to those funds. It can be managed by the land trust, or it can be managed by a bunch of different things. And I don't see a lot of those models. The biggest one that I have seen is from Jay Morrison of the Tulsa Real Estate Fund. And then he was the face of it, and then something happened, and it was kind of shut down. And so it's very much like you need to build those relationships where if 10 years down the line, you're not hearing somebody in your place, the system has already been established so that it's maintained, as opposed to just being kind of wobbly infrastructure can be taken down the way. But one says I didn't know about it and talked to a bunch of people, and so I was reading like it's like 1,000 different reports, and I'm just flipping through them, and I'm like, oh, they talk about this, did it actually get created? Because when I was talking to my person at the city, he said that they didn't have any money, and then they were the main partner of this fund. And I'm like, so you do have money?
But I don't have any money.
Huh?
So I didn't have any money.
No, they didn't. No, he told me that they didn't actually create the fund. They partnered and basically did whatever they needed to do with their department. But that basically they just created the fund in collaboration with them and banks. So it's kind of like just understanding. That's what I wanted this conversation to be about. Just understanding who needs to be in the space or give you access to the right kind of information that you can use as leverage. Because you said you don't have money, apparently you have something done. If I act nicely, right? Like, so it's not like that kind of thing where you just need to know how to set yourself up. What you doing?
I'm looking up how to fix this.
Okay. Is everybody on the call doing okay? Does anybody have anything that they would like to talk about? I'm kind of interested in the church folks. Y'all said y'all were in the process of submitting for some tax credits, and you need to wait till next cycle, I guess. Do you want to talk about that, or?
Yes, it'll be next cycle for us. We're just trying to learn as much as we can.
Okay, anything in particular that we can talk about right now that you didn't know that you would like to know more about?
We'll probably go through the recording
Okay.
because we heard bits and pieces of the conversation in the room, but